The arrival. It was a hot summer day in 1952 when Charlie's mother dropped him off at his grandmother's farmhouse. The sun was high in the sky, and the Kansas countryside seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The long dirt road that led up to the farmhouse was dusty and quiet, and the wind whispered through the tall grass. The house itself was old, built many years ago, with large wooden beams and a front porch that creaked with age. The paint on the walls was peeling, and the windows were covered with thick curtains. Charlie wasn't excited about spending the summer at his grandmother's house. It was too far from his friends, and there was nothing to do except explore the endless fields. But his mother insisted. "Your grandmother's been asking about you," she'd said. "It'll be good for you to spend some time with her." So here he was. As Charlie stepped out of the car, he looked at the farmhouse. His grandmother Martha stood on the porch, waving. She was a small, wiry woman with gray hair tied up in a neat bun. Her skin was pale and wrinkled, but her smile was warm. "Charlie, it's so good to see you," she said, her voice soft but clear. Charlie gave a small wave back. "Hi, Grandma," he said, feeling awkward. He had only seen her a few times before, and the house always made him feel uneasy. His grandmother motioned for him to come inside. Come in, I've got your room ready." Charlie followed her into the house. The smell of old wood and dust filled the air. Inside, the house was dim, with only a few rays of sunlight peeking through the curtains. The floors creaked as they walked down the hallway, and Charlie couldn't help but feel a strange chill. The house was quiet, too quiet. "I've left the room just as you like it," Grandma Martha said, leading him to a small bedroom at the back of the house. It was cozy but plain, with a single bed and a wooden dresser. A rocking chair sat by the window, which overlooked the fields. Charlie set his suitcase down and looked around. There was something about this room that felt off. Maybe it was the way the shadows seemed to cling to the corners, or the way the air was thick with silence. He wasn't sure, but he didn't like it. Grandma Martha smiled. "Now, I'll leave you to settle in. I'm going to make us some lunch. I'll call you when it's ready." As she left the room, Charlie sat down on the bed. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The forbidden door. The next few days passed slowly. Charlie spent most of his time exploring the house and the surrounding farm. He discovered the garden behind the house, where Grandma Martha grew vegetables and a small barn with a few chickens. But the farmhouse itself felt like it had secrets, like there were parts of it that weren't meant to be seen. One day, while Charlie was rummaging through the attic, he found something strange. The attic was full of old furniture, dusty books, and boxes that hadn't been touched in years. There were things that belonged to people Charlie had never met. Old photographs, letters tied with string, and faded dresses that looked like they belonged to another time. As he moved a stack of boxes to make room, he noticed something odd. In the corner of the attic, behind a pile of old quilts, there was a door. It was small, almost hidden from view, and the wood was dark and weathered. Charlie had never seen this door before, even though he'd spent plenty of time in the attic before. It was like it had been there all along, waiting for him to find it. The door had no handle, just a rusted keyhole. But what caught Charlie's attention was the sign above the door. It was carved into the wood, the letters old and worn. "Do not open." Charlie's heart raced. He had always been curious, and the idea of a forbidden room intrigued him. But something about the warning felt serious. He thought about his grandmother's voice, her soft, gentle tone, but also the way she had warned him never to go into the attic without her. Still, Charlie couldn't resist. He searched around the attic, and after some time found a small old key lying in a drawer. It seemed to match the keyhole on the door. With trembling hands, he inserted the key into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a small, musty room beyond. The air was thick with dust, and the floor was covered in old sheets. But what made Charlie's skin crawl was the feeling of eyes watching him. As he stepped inside, the shadows in the room seemed to shift, as though something or someone was waiting. The room was empty, but Charlie felt a sense of dread he couldn't explain. Chapter 3. The Shadows Stir. As night fell, Charlie lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, too quiet. He could hear the wind outside rustling the trees, but everything inside felt still. He couldn't stop thinking about the room in the attic, the forbidden room he'd discovered. He had to know more. The shadows in the room seemed to haunt him, calling him back. Charlie tried to ignore them, but his curiosity was too strong. He quietly got out of bed and tiptoed down the hallway. His grandmother's door was closed, and he could hear her soft breathing. When he reached the attic, he felt his heart pounding in his chest. The door was still ajar, just as he had left it. He stepped inside, the air colder than it had been before. This time, the shadows felt different. They seemed to move, like they were alive. Charlie's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, he thought he saw something. A figure standing in the corner of the room. It was tall and thin, its shape shifting and writhing in the darkness. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. Charlie froze. His heart pounded in his ears. He could hear whispers, faint voices, like a breeze brushing against his skin. The shadows seemed to beckon him closer, pulling him toward the center of the room. "Come closer," a voice whispered. Charlie felt his feet move on their own. He didn't want to go, but he couldn't stop himself. The shadows seemed to pull him, drawing him toward the center of the room. There on the floor, he saw something that sent a chill through his spine. A strange, glowing symbol. It was etched into the wood, its lines sharp and jagged, like something ancient. The whispering grew louder, and Charlie's mind spun. He didn't understand what was happening, but one thing was clear. The room was alive, and whatever was in there with him didn't want him to leave. The family secret, Charlie's encounters with the shadows grew more frequent as the days passed. At night, they would come to life, their whispers growing louder. He couldn't ignore them anymore. He needed to know the truth. One evening after dinner, Charlie sat with his grandmother on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. Grandma Martha seemed lost in thought, staring at the horizon. "Grandma," Charlie began hesitantly, "what's behind that door in the attic?" His grandmother's eyes snapped to him, and for a moment her expression seemed to harden. She set her glass down and took a deep breath. "Charlie, there are things in this house. Things that are better left undisturbed." Charlie pressed on. "What are they? What's in that room?" Grandma Martha looked at him with a sad smile. "Your great-grandfather made a deal many years ago. A dangerous deal. He tried to use dark magic to bring back someone he lost. But the magic went wrong. The shadows you've seen are the result of that mistake. They're trapped in that room, bound by the deal he made." Charlie felt his heart race. "And what happens if the shadows are freed?" His grandmother's face grew pale. "If they are freed, they will take what they want, and the cost will be high." The bargain. Charlie lay awake that night, the weight of his grandmother's words pressing heavily on his chest. Shadows, dark magic, a forbidden bargain. It was all too much for him to understand, yet everything in the house seemed to point toward it. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper in the wind, seemed like a reminder that he had crossed a line, one that he could not erase. The next morning, as Charlie wandered through the fields near the house, he thought about the things his grandmother had said. What had his great-grandfather done? Who had he tried to bring back? And why had his family kept such a dark secret for so many years? The day felt oppressive, as though the air itself was thick with the weight of his questions. Charlie's mind raced, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him from the shadows of the old farmhouse. Even as he walked, his eyes darted nervously toward the windows of the house, as if expecting to see a figure staring back at him. When he returned to the house, his grandmother was sitting in the kitchen, quietly peeling potatoes for dinner. Her eyes were focused on the task in front of her, but she didn't seem surprised to see him. "Charlie," she said, her voice soft but serious, "I know you've been to the attic again. You've been hearing them, haven't you?" Charlie swallowed. He hadn't meant to confess, but the truth seemed to pour out of him. "Yes, they called to me. At night. They want me to come closer." Grandma Martha's face grew even more somber. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, then sat down across from him. "Your great-grandfather, Arthur, was a man consumed by grief. He lost someone very dear to him. Your great-grandmother, Clara. She died in childbirth, and Arthur couldn't let go. He turned to magic, the kind of magic that promised to bring the dead back to life. Charlie's heart pounded in his chest. He could hardly believe what his grandmother was saying. But it didn't work, did it? No, Charlie. The magic never works the way people think it will, Grandma Martha said with a sad smile. It tore through everything, leaving nothing but shadows. The magic bound Clara's soul in a place beyond the living, a place between life and death. Arthur couldn't save her. Instead, he condemned his own family to live with the consequences of his actions. Charlie felt a chill run down his spine. So, those shadows, they're all because of him? Yes, and they won't stop until they're freed. But they can't be freed without a price, a terrible price, Grandma Martha said. I've kept the door locked for years, hoping that the shadows would fade with time. But I fear they've become too strong now. I've tried to keep you away from it, but the moment you found that door, Charlie felt a surge of fear. He had always been curious, but now he wondered if that curiosity had led him into something that was far beyond his understanding. What do they want, Grandma? She hesitated before answering. They want to be free. They want to walk in the world again, but only if they can claim a soul to replace the one they lost. If they are freed, they will take someone, and they will never stop. Charlie's mind raced. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't let his grandmother become a victim of the curse. But what could he do? He was just a boy. What power did he have against ancient magic? Grandma Martha placed a hand on his. You've already done something, Charlie. You found the door, but now you must find a way to close it forever. I'm too old and weak to stop them. It's up to you now. The night was coming quickly, and Charlie knew he couldn't wait much longer. The shadows in the attic were growing more restless, and every passing minute seemed to bring them closer to breaking free. He couldn't let that happen. He couldn't let the dark forces from the past destroy his family. That evening, after his grandmother had gone to bed, Charlie gathered his courage. He grabbed a flashlight, a few old books he had found in the attic, and the key to the forbidden room. His heart pounded as he climbed the stairs to the attic. The door to the forbidden room loomed in front of him as if it was waiting. Charlie took a deep breath and inserted the key into the lock. The door creaked open, and the room felt colder than before. The shadows stirred, and Charlie could hear their whispers more clearly now. Their voices seemed desperate, eager, as if they could sense his presence. Charlie walked into the center of the room, holding his flashlight in front of him. The shadows seemed to twist and shift around him, their form barely visible in the dim light. He flipped through the pages of the old books he had brought, searching for something, anything, that might help him stop what was coming. Finally, he found what he was looking for. A ritual. It was simple, but it required something vital. A sacrifice. The ritual called for the person who had unlocked the door to offer something precious, something that tied them to the world of the living. Charlie's heart sank. He didn't want to do it, but he knew he had no choice. With trembling hands, he lit a candle in the middle of the room and placed it on the floor. The shadows seemed to pause as if they were waiting for something. He held up his grandmother's old locket, the one she had always worn around her neck. The locket had once belonged to Clara, his great-grandmother, and Charlie knew it held a piece of the past. It was the key to the ritual. Charlie closed his eyes, whispering the incantation he had read from the book. He could feel the temperature in the room drop, and the shadows seemed to grow darker and closer. Then, as the last words left his lips, the shadows surged forward, swirling around him like a storm. For a moment, Charlie thought he would be swallowed by them. But then, with all his strength, he thrust the locket into the air, holding it high above his head. "No," he shouted. "You won't have her. You won't take anyone else." The shadows recoiled, as if they were afraid of the light. The room seemed to shake, and Charlie felt a rush of energy fill his body. The shadows screamed in fury, but the power of the ritual was too strong. The light from the locket shone brighter, pushing the darkness back. Slowly, the shadows began to fade, their forms disintegrating into nothingness. The aftermath, the room was silent once more. Charlie stood there, breathing heavily, his heart still racing. The locket hung from his hand, glowing faintly, and the shadows were gone. He could feel it, the weight lifting from his chest. The curse had been broken. When Charlie returned to his grandmother's room, he found her awake, sitting in a chair by the window. Her eyes were wide, and there was a sense of peace in them that had not been there before. She looked at Charlie and smiled, as if she knew what had happened. "You did it," she whispered. You freed us." Charlie nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. The shadows were gone. The curse was broken. He had saved his family from the darkness that had haunted them for so long. And as the sun began to rise over the Kansas fields, Charlie knew that he would never forget what had happened in that house. The secrets, the shadows, and the power of the past that had nearly consumed them all. But for now, he could breathe easy. The house was at peace, and so was he.